My brother moved his girlfriend into my apartment while I was sick and now they're calling it their place. Hi everyone. Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post, posted 3 months ago. I'm still shaking as I write this. I, 31M, was hospitalized for 2 weeks with severe complications from what started as a routine surgery. My brother Michael, 33M, had my spare key for emergencies, and I thought he was just checking on my apartment while I was gone. I came home today expecting to collapse into my own bed and start my recovery in peace. Instead, I opened my front door to find complete strangers living in my space. My living room furniture has been rearranged. There's a different coffee table, new throw pillows, and pictures of people I don't know on my walls. My kitchen has been completely reorganized. Different dishes in the cabinets, new magnets on my fridge, and food I didn't buy filling my pantry. But the real shock came when I walked into my bedroom. My bed has different sheets. My dresser has been moved. And there are women's clothes hanging in my closet. Lots of them. Like someone has been living here for weeks. I stood there in complete confusion when I heard keys in the front door. In walks my brother Michael with a woman I've never met before. She's carrying grocery bags and talking about picking up some things for dinner tonight. When they saw me, they both froze. "David," Michael said, looking genuinely surprised. "You're home early. How are you feeling?" I asked him what the hell was going on. Who was this woman, and why did my apartment look completely different? That's when he introduced her as his girlfriend Jessica, 28F. Apparently, they've been staying here while I was in the hospital. He said it so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I asked him to clarify what he meant by staying here. Jessica spoke up and said, "Oh, we've been taking really good care of the place. We reorganized everything to make it more functional. And we've been keeping it clean and lived in so it wouldn't feel abandoned." I stared at them both. I never asked anyone to reorganize my apartment. I never asked anyone to move in. I certainly never gave permission for my brother's girlfriend, who I'd never even met, to treat my home like her own personal decoration project. Michael seemed to realize I wasn't happy. He started explaining that he thought it would be good for the apartment to have people in it. That it was safer this way. That they were doing me a favor by making sure everything stayed in good condition. But here's the thing, I never asked for any of this. I never agreed to let them live here. And I definitely never agreed to let a complete stranger reorganize my entire living space while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. I asked them to leave. I said I needed space to recover and wanted my apartment back the way it was. That's when things got weird. Jessica looked hurt and said, "But we've put so much work into making this place better. Don't you like what we've done?" Michael backed her up, saying I should be grateful that they kept the place alive while I was gone. He said most people would appreciate having someone care for their home like this. I told them again that I wanted them to leave. I said I was tired, I was recovering from surgery, and I just wanted my own space back. Michael got defensive. He said I was being ungrateful and that I should have called ahead to let them know I was coming home. Called ahead. To come home to my own apartment. That I pay rent for. After being in the hospital for 2 weeks. They eventually left, but not before Jessica mentioned that she'd need a few days to find somewhere for all the improvements we've made. She said it like she was doing me another favor. I'm sitting here now in my own apartment that doesn't feel like mine. My books have been reorganized. My bathroom has new towels and different soap. Even my refrigerator has been cleaned out and restocked with food I don't eat. I don't know what to think. Part of me wonders if I'm overreacting. They did keep the place clean and clearly put effort into it. But a bigger part of me feels completely violated. This is my home. I never gave permission for any of this. Am I crazy for being upset? Should I be grateful that they took care of the place? Or is this as messed up as it feels to me right now? Update 1, posted 1 week later. The situation has gotten so much worse. After my original post, Michael came by the next day to talk things through. I thought he was coming to apologize and maybe help me put my apartment back the way it was. Instead, he brought Jessica with him, and they both sat down on my couch like they were staging an intervention. Michael started by saying he'd been thinking about our conversation, and he felt like I wasn't seeing the big picture. He said that while I was in the hospital, he realized how much responsibility it was to take care of my place. He had to water my plants, check my mail, make sure nothing was wrong with the plumbing or electricity. It was a lot of work. Then Jessica chimed in. She said she hoped I understood how much effort they'd put into improving the space. She'd spent her own money on new decorations. She'd deep-cleaned everything. She'd organized my closets and even threw away clothes she thought were too worn out to keep. That's when I learned she'd thrown away some of my clothes. Without asking. Including a hoodie my grandfather gave me before he died. I asked her where my clothes were, hoping maybe she'd just donated them and I could get them back. She said she threw them in the dumpster behind the building 3 days ago. They were gone. I lost it. I told her she had no right to throw away my belongings, regardless of what condition she thought they were in. I told both of them that I never asked for their help and never gave permission for any of what they'd done. That's when Michael dropped the bomb. He said that taking care of my apartment had been such a big responsibility that he thought it would be fair if they could stay a little longer to make sure I was fully recovered before living alone again. I asked him what he meant by that. Jessica explained that they'd gotten comfortable in the space, and since they'd put so much work into improving it, they thought it made sense to stay for a few more weeks. Just to make sure I was okay and didn't need help with anything. I told them absolutely not. I said I was fine, I was recovering well, and I wanted my apartment back to myself. That's when Michael played the family card. He said I was being selfish and that family helps family. He said that when I was younger and needed help, he was always there for me, and now he needed a place to stay with his girlfriend for just a little while longer. Here's what I learned. Michael and Jessica had been living in a month-to-month rental that they decided not to renew. They'd planned to move in together somewhere new, but they hadn't found a place yet. My hospital stay had given them a free place to stay while they figured things out. They hadn't been doing me a favor by taking care of my apartment. They'd been using my apartment as their temporary housing solution. When I realized this, I told them they had until the weekend to find somewhere else to stay. I said I was sorry they were having housing issues, but my apartment wasn't the solution. Michael got angry. He said I was being unreasonable and that I should be grateful to have family who cared enough to help me. He said that if I kicked them out, I'd be proving that I didn't care about family. Jessica started crying. She said she'd put her heart into making the apartment beautiful, and now I was rejecting all her hard work. She said she felt like I was rejecting her. I stood my ground. I said they could have their belongings out by Sunday, and I wanted my spare key back. They left angry, and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Yesterday, I came home from a follow-up doctor's appointment to find them in my apartment again. They'd used the key to let themselves in while I was gone. Jessica was cooking dinner in my kitchen, and Michael was watching TV on my couch. When I asked what they were doing there, Michael said they'd decided that the situation wasn't fair to anyone, so they were going to make it fair. He said that since they'd been contributing to the household by taking care of the place, and since Jessica had invested her own money into improvements, they deserved to have some say in how things worked. He suggested we work out a roommate arrangement where they'd pay a portion of the rent and utilities, and we'd all live there together until they found their own place. I said absolutely not. This is a one-bedroom apartment. There's barely room for me, let alone 3 people. And more importantly, I never agreed to have roommates. Jessica said she thought I was being closed-minded and that this could be a great opportunity for us all to get to know each other better. She said Michael had told her so much about me, and she'd been looking forward to becoming like a sister to me. I told them both to leave immediately and to give me back my key. Michael refused. He said that legally, they'd been living there for over 2 weeks, and that gave them tenant rights. He said if I wanted them out, I'd have to go through the proper legal channels. I don't know if that's true or not, but the confidence with which he said it made me think he'd looked into it. They're still here. They're sleeping on my couch and using my shower and eating food they buy and put in my refrigerator. Jessica has started referring to it as our place when she talks to people on the phone. I feel like I'm going insane. This is my apartment. I pay the rent. My name is on the lease. But somehow I'm being made to feel like the unreasonable one for wanting my own space back. I'm looking into what my legal options are, but everything I'm reading online is confusing and seems to take forever. Meanwhile, they're becoming more comfortable every day. Last night, Jessica asked if I minded if she invited some friends over for dinner this weekend. In my apartment. That she's been living in for 2 weeks without my permission. I said no, obviously. She seemed genuinely surprised and hurt by my response. I don't know what to do. I'm still recovering from surgery, I'm exhausted all the time, and I feel like I'm being held hostage in my own home. How did trying to recover from a medical procedure turn into this nightmare? Update 2, posted 3 weeks later. I can't believe I'm back with another update, but things have taken a turn that I never could have predicted. After my last post, I took the advice of several commenters and started documenting everything. I took photos of my apartment before and after their improvements. I started writing down every conversation we had about them leaving. I looked into tenant laws in my area and found out that Michael was wrong. Having someone's permission to stay temporarily while they're in the hospital doesn't automatically create tenant rights, especially when that permission was never explicitly given for more than basic caretaking. But before I could take any legal action, something happened that changed everything. I was at another follow-up appointment when I got a call from my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She's an older woman who's lived in the building for 20 years and keeps an eye on everything that happens. She told me that there were people moving furniture into my apartment. Big pieces. A couch, a dining table, a dresser. She asked if I was expecting a delivery. I told her I definitely wasn't, and I'd be home in 30 minutes. When I got back to my building, there was a moving truck parked outside. I ran upstairs to find my front door propped open and Michael directing two guys who were bringing in furniture that I'd never seen before. My living room had been completely rearranged again to make room for a sectional couch that took up most of the space. My small dining area now had a table and 4 chairs, even though there had never been room for that before. And they were trying to figure out how to fit a large dresser somewhere in the bedroom area. I asked Michael what the hell was going on. He said that since they were going to be staying for a while longer, they needed to make the space more functional for 3 people. Jessica had found some great deals on furniture, and they thought it would be better for everyone if the apartment was set up properly. I asked him who said they were staying for a while longer. I'd been very clear that I wanted them out. That's when Jessica appeared from the kitchen. She said they'd been thinking about my concerns, and they understood that I was stressed about the living situation. But she said they'd come up with a solution that would work for everyone. She handed me a piece of paper. It was a handwritten roommate agreement that they'd drawn up. It outlined how they'd pay a third of the rent and utilities, how they'd split household chores, and how they'd respect my privacy by staying out of the bedroom area during certain hours. At the bottom, there were 3 signature lines. Michael and Jessica had already signed it. I stared at this paper in disbelief. They'd written up a contract to live in my apartment and expected me to sign it. I told them I wasn't signing anything and I wanted all the new furniture removed immediately. That's when Michael said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "David, I think you need to be realistic about your situation. You just had major surgery. You're not fully recovered. You're not thinking clearly about what's best for you right now. Jessica and I are here to help, but we can't help if you won't let us." Jessica nodded and said, "We're worried about you living alone while you're still recovering. What if something happens? What if you have complications? We think it's safer for everyone if we're here to keep an eye on things." They were talking about my medical condition like it made me incompetent to make decisions about my own living situation. I told them to get out. I said I was calling the police if they didn't remove their furniture and leave immediately. Michael laughed. He said the police wouldn't do anything because they hadn't broken any laws. They'd been staying there with permission, they'd been contributing to the household, and they had documentation of their tenancy. He showed me a folder full of papers. Receipts for groceries they'd bought. Photos of them in the apartment with timestamps. Copies of utility bills with notes about how they'd been contributing to household expenses by paying for things while I was in the hospital. Jessica added that they'd also been documenting my erratic behavior since I'd come home from the hospital. She said they were concerned about my mental state and thought I might need more support than I was willing to admit. I realized they'd been planning this for weeks. They hadn't been trying to help me or take care of my apartment. They'd been building a case to establish residency and make it as legally complicated as possible for me to remove them. That's when I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I told them they could have the apartment. Michael looked confused. Jessica asked me to clarify what I meant. I said that if they wanted to live there so badly, they could take over the lease. I'd talk to my landlord about transferring it to them, and I'd find somewhere else to live. They were both quiet for a minute. Then Michael said that wasn't what they wanted. They said they couldn't afford the full rent on their own, and they didn't want me to move out. They wanted to share the space. That's when I knew I had them. I said that was too bad, because those were the only 2 options. Either they moved out immediately, or they took over the lease and I moved out. There was no third option where we all lived together. Jessica said that wasn't fair. She said they'd put too much work into the apartment to just give it up, but they also couldn't afford to take it over completely. I told them that life wasn't fair, and this was my apartment, so these were the terms. I gave them 24 hours to decide. Update 3, posted 2 weeks later. The 24-hour ultimatum worked, but not in the way I expected. Michael and Jessica spent that entire day trying to negotiate. They asked if I'd consider a lower percentage of rent from them. They suggested we divide the apartment into zones where we'd each have private space. Jessica even proposed a schedule for who could use the living room and kitchen during different hours of the day. I said no to everything. I told them the only options were still, they leave, or they take over the lease and I leave. By the end of the day, they asked if they could have a few more days to figure out their finances and see if they could take over the lease. I agreed to give them until the end of the week. Here's what I didn't tell them. I'd already started looking for a new place. Not because I wanted to move, but because I wanted to have a backup plan ready. I'd also been documenting everything they'd done and said, and I'd started making copies of all my important documents and moving my most valuable possessions to a storage unit, just in case. 3 days later, Michael came to me with a proposal. He said they'd found a co-signer who could help them take over the lease. Jessica's parents were willing to guarantee the rent if I was serious about moving out. But there was a catch. They wanted me to leave most of the furniture. Michael said that since Jessica had put so much work into decorating and organizing the space, and since they'd bought furniture specifically for the apartment, it would be unfair to make them start over somewhere else. He had a list of things they wanted me to leave behind: my couch, my dining table, my bookshelf, my kitchen appliances, even my bed frame. Basically everything except my clothes and personal items. I told him that was ridiculous. If they were taking over the lease, they could buy their own furniture. Jessica said that they'd spent their savings on the furniture they'd already bought, and asking them to replace everything I took would put them in financial hardship. I looked at this woman who had thrown away my clothes, reorganized my entire apartment without permission, and tried to establish squatters' rights in my home, and I realized she was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. I told them they could have the apartment, but I was taking all of my belongings with me. Michael said that wasn't reasonable and that I was being spiteful. I said they had 2 days to decide, take the apartment as is with whatever furniture they'd bought, or get out so I could stay. That's when the real drama started. Jessica called my mother. I got a call the next day from my mom asking me what was going on with Michael and his girlfriend. She said Jessica had called her crying, saying that I was trying to make them homeless and that I was being cruel to family. My mother asked me to explain what had happened, so I told her everything. The whole story, from coming home from the hospital to find strangers in my apartment, to their attempts to establish tenancy, to the ultimatum I'd given them. My mother was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she asked, "Did you give Michael permission to let his girlfriend live in your apartment?" I said no, absolutely not. She asked, "Did you ask them to reorganize your things and throw away your belongings?" I said no. She asked, "Did you agree to any kind of roommate situation?" I said no, I'd been very clear that I wanted them out from the beginning. Then my mother said something that surprised me, "Then what the hell is wrong with your brother?" Apparently, Jessica had presented the situation very differently to my family. She'd told them that I'd agreed to let them stay temporarily, that we'd worked out a roommate arrangement, and that now I was going back on our agreement and trying to kick them out for no reason. My mother called Michael immediately. I wasn't there for that conversation, but apparently it was not pleasant. 2 hours later, Michael showed up at my apartment looking defeated. He said they couldn't afford to take over the lease, even with Jessica's parents as co-signers. The rent was too high for them to manage on their own, and they'd already spent most of their savings on furniture and deposits for other places they'd applied to but didn't get. He asked if there was any way we could work out a temporary arrangement where they stayed just for 1 more month while they found something they could afford. I said no. He asked if they could at least return the furniture they'd bought and get some of their money back before they moved out. I said that was between them and the furniture store, but they needed to be out by the weekend. That's when he finally admitted what this had really been about. Michael and Jessica had been evicted from their previous apartment for not paying rent. They owed their old landlord 3 months of back rent, which meant they couldn't get approved for most new places. They'd been staying in hotels and with friends for 2 months before I went into the hospital. When Michael got my spare key, they saw an opportunity to have a stable place to stay while they figured out their situation. They thought that if they could establish residency and make themselves useful, I'd eventually agree to let them stay permanently or at least long-term. The furniture, the reorganizing, the attempts to create legal documentation of their tenancy, it had all been part of a plan to make it as difficult as possible for me to kick them out. Jessica had researched tenant rights and squatters' laws. She'd been the one who suggested documenting my erratic behavior and framing their presence as necessary for my health and safety. Michael said he was sorry, but he also said he'd been desperate and didn't know what else to do. I told him I understood being desperate, but I didn't understand lying to me, manipulating me, and trying to steal my apartment. They moved out that weekend. It took them 2 full days to remove all the furniture they'd brought in, and even then they left behind a lot of smaller items that they said they couldn't fit in their new situation. I found out later they'd ended up moving back in with Jessica's parents, which apparently was an option that had been available the entire time. Final update, posted 2 months later. I thought I was done with updates, but recent events have convinced me that I need to share how this story actually ended. After Michael and Jessica moved out, I spent several weeks putting my apartment back together. Some of my belongings were damaged or missing, including several items with sentimental value that I'll never be able to replace. I had to buy new furniture to replace things that had been moved or thrown away. The whole experience cost me several $1,000s and months of stress during what should have been my recovery period. But I thought it was over. I thought they'd learned their lesson and would leave me alone. I was wrong. About 6 weeks ago, I started getting calls from debt collectors. The first call was from a credit card company asking about a balance on an account I'd never opened. When I told them I didn't have an account with them, they read me an address, my address, and said the account had been opened by someone with my name and social security number. That's when I realized Michael and Jessica had stolen my identity. Over the next few days, I discovered that during the time they were living in my apartment, they'd opened several credit cards in my name, taken out a personal loan, and even tried to open a utility account using my information. They'd had access to my mail, my personal documents, and my computer while I was in the hospital and during the weeks they'd been fighting to stay. The total damage was over $15,000 in fraudulent charges and debt. I immediately filed a police report and started the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts. I also hired a lawyer, because the situation had moved way beyond a simple family dispute. But while I was dealing with the identity theft, something else happened that made everything even more complicated. Jessica started receiving mail at my apartment. Not forwarded mail from her previous address. New mail, bills, credit card statements, even a voter registration confirmation. She'd changed her address to my apartment on multiple accounts and official documents. When I called her to ask her to correct her address with these companies, she told me that she'd been using my address because she and Michael were between permanent addresses and needed somewhere stable to receive important mail. I told her that was fraud and that she needed to stop immediately. She said she didn't see what the big deal was, since she wasn't actually living there anymore. She said she'd change her address as soon as they found a permanent place to live. That's when I found out they weren't living with Jessica's parents like I'd thought. They'd stayed there for less than a week before getting kicked out for violating house rules. They'd been staying in extended stay motels and with various friends, moving every few days when they wore out their welcome. Jessica had been using my address because it was the only stable address she had access to. I told her she had 48 hours to change her address with every company and organization, or I'd file additional fraud charges against her. She hung up on me. 2 days later, I got a call from someone claiming to be an insurance investigator. They said there had been a claim filed on a renter's insurance policy for an apartment at my address, and they needed to verify some information about recent damage to the property. I told them I didn't have renter's insurance and asked what claim they were talking about. It turns out Jessica had taken out a renter's insurance policy on my apartment, listing herself as the primary tenant. She then filed a claim saying that her personal belongings had been damaged when she was wrongfully evicted by her unstable roommate. She was trying to get insurance money for the furniture and personal items she'd had to remove from my apartment. That was the final straw. I contacted my lawyer and told him I wanted to pursue every possible legal action against both Michael and Jessica. Within a week, they were both served with papers for identity theft, fraud, and filing false insurance claims. The prosecutor's office also picked up the case for the criminal charges. Michael called me the day he was served. He was crying and begging me not to press charges. He said Jessica had convinced him that the identity theft was just borrowing, and that they'd intended to pay everything back once they got back on their feet. He said he knew it was wrong, but he'd been so stressed about their living situation that he hadn't been thinking clearly. He promised to make it right if I'd drop the charges. I told him it was too late for that. They'd had multiple opportunities to make things right, and instead they'd continued to escalate their fraud and manipulation. Jessica, on the other hand, didn't call to apologize. She called to threaten me. She said that if I didn't drop the charges, she'd make my life hell. She said she'd contact my employer and tell them I was an unstable person who attacked family members. She said she'd post on social media about how I'd abandoned my sick brother and destroyed an innocent woman's life. She said she had photos and videos of me from when I was recovering that made me look unhinged, and that she'd use them to prove I was mentally unstable. I recorded that phone call and turned it over to my lawyer as evidence of harassment and intimidation. Last week, both Michael and Jessica pled guilty to multiple charges. Michael got probation and community service, plus restitution for the financial damage they'd caused. Jessica got 6 months in jail because of her previous record. Apparently this wasn't her first time committing fraud, and because she'd continued to escalate the situation even after being caught. The identity theft and insurance fraud added up to felony charges that will stay on both of their records permanently. My apartment is finally, truly mine again. I've changed all the locks, installed a security system, and I'm in the process of getting my financial life back in order. The bank has removed most of the fraudulent charges from my credit report, and I'm working with the credit bureaus to clear up the rest. But the biggest change is that I've learned something important about family boundaries. Michael spent years taking advantage of my willingness to help family members, and I let it happen because I thought that's what family was supposed to do for each other. This experience taught me that real family members don't exploit your medical emergencies to steal your home and your identity. Real family members don't lie to your face for weeks while planning to defraud you. And real family members definitely don't threaten to destroy your reputation when they get caught. I haven't spoken to Michael since the court proceedings ended. He's left several voicemails apologizing and asking for another chance, but I'm done giving him chances. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned this thoroughly. Jessica is still in jail, but she's been making phone calls to mutual acquaintances trying to get people to pressure me into forgiving her and helping her get back on her feet when she gets out. I've made it clear to everyone that I want no contact with her, ever. The whole experience cost me about $20,000 in legal fees, replacement belongings, and financial damage, plus months of stress and recovery time that I'll never get back. But it also taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that I don't have to tolerate people who treat me badly just because we share DNA. I'm finally living peacefully in my own space, surrounded by my own belongings, with locks that only I have keys to. It's taken almost 6 months to get here, but it was worth the fight. To anyone dealing with something similar, document everything. Don't let people guilt you into accepting unacceptable behavior, and remember that you don't owe anyone access to your life just because they call themselves family. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who will hurt you the worst. But you don't have to let them.